you so much for your commitment to our mission.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for that very warm welcome. I know I stand between everybody and lunch, which is a vulnerable position. But I want to add a few thoughts to the rather powerful presentations that we've already heard this morning. And starting a little bit with my own personal experience, I'm a former security minister in the UK, and that being translated actually means you're responsible for cybersecurity in particular. And we started out this is about 2010, with writing the UK's first fully funded, let's say, in other words, something that really was meant to work, cybersecurity strategy. And it fundamentally, I think, looking back on it, it fundamentally changed the way we looked at national security and the way we looked actually at the component parts, foreign policy, defense, and indeed homeland security. The UK had grasped, as a result of having had a very prolonged experience by then with terrorism, that homeland security had to be part of the spectrum of issues that national security had to deal with, and that you had to close the gap that existed between how you dealt with foreign policy and defense and the way you dealt with homeland security. And in many ways, I think cyber was absolutely crucial to that perception. Because the thing about cyber that we grasped at an early stage was that it affects the economy. It's not just your defense, your national security, it's also your economic future. It's your economic agenda. And these two agendas now march in step with each other, and we have to protect both. I very much agree with the rather powerful presentation we just had on China. And China was in our sights right from the outset. Why? Because China was the country, more than, say, Russia or indeed some of the other big players, and it's not just China and Russia that we have to deal with. There's also North Korea, which has made a vocation in the world of crime. There's Iran as well, who does it for political but also for criminal reasons. And there are various other players, all of whom have developed specialties of the kind which are capable of penetrating and doing us real damage. So why were we interested in China? Well, at that stage, it was because they had already achieved a considerable reputation for stealing your intellectual property. And they did that, and primarily, not exclusively, but primarily by cyber means. That challenge to us has now been expanded, of course, very greatly into what it amounts to, the competition for future technologies, and indeed for the kind of knowledge and power and wealth-creating base that is going to determine leadership in the world. I don't think one should be blind to the level of the challenge that we face. And cyber is absolutely central to the way in which that competition is being conducted. I'm not going to repeat what was said, but of course it pervades competition in the economic sphere. It's how you conduct your military operations, and indeed it's how you run your societies. And I'm going to say something about that which hasn't actually been mentioned hitherto. So the UK has since then developed not just cybersecurity strategy, but also something it calls cyber strategy. You might ask, well, what's the difference between those two? And there's indeed a great deal of overlap, between the kind of things you're concerned about, the resilience of your critical national infrastructure, which we certainly need to be concerned about. But it also, I think, concerns actually what's come to be known as the grey zone, hybrid warfare, but also inside our own societies, how we use the electronic methods of communication now, and the cyber methods of communication, the social media, for good rather than for harm in society. It is the sad truth and it's certainly true in the UK, and I'm sure it is true elsewhere, that we see cyber platforms, being used for really harmful purposes. And we have at the moment, some rather startling and worrying phenomenon of not just girls, but girls in particular, whose mental emotions are being greatly under attack as a result of what they can find on the web. And there are suicides involved. And these are not issues that society can simply brush under the carpet. They're absolutely fundamental, to family life, to parenting, and to the stability of society. The other part of hybrid activity, of course, is the way in which, and the United States in particular has experienced this, the way in which some of our non-friends, our enemies, use hybrid and use technologies in the cyber framework to open up division in our societies using artificial intelligence, machine learning, to open up division, to create argument in societies where none would otherwise exist, for the purposes of bringing about conflict, internal argument of a kind, of destabilizing political processes, and also creating distrust, quite deliberately an effort to create lack of trust and distrust between the governed and the governing. I think we've all had these experiences, and we shouldn't, I think, ignore the fact that they are going to be now an integral part of the way in which unattractive, offensive relationships are conducted. So cyber has spread into every nook and cranny of life. It's defense, it's our resilience at home, it's our economy and our future competition, and it's also, thirdly, the stability of our societies, both from external attack, but also internally, how we conduct our affairs. I thought what I'd do, because there have been so many intelligent things already been said, is I'd just take 3 examples of the kind of things that we need to, the problems that arise as a result of the cyber world, which we need to look at. And I've chosen deliberately one in the military sphere, one in the economic, and one in the social. And the military one, I gather, I unfortunately wasn't here this morning to hear John Bolton, but I gather that he did actually raise one of the issues that I want to talk about, which is the implications that of NATO's declaration. And it's an important thing to have done, that cyber is capable of triggering an Article 5 situation. I'm sure everyone in this room knows what that means is that the whole of the alliance is engaged then in the defense of the nation or the society that's been attacked. Thing is, what does that mean? What does it mean? I mean, there's been an incident just recently, and everybody knows about it, in Poland. And you have to ask yourself the question, if that had gone wrong, and there was argument, would we have found ourselves potentially asking the question, does the alliance have to come to the defense of the Polish state? And we didn't. I think it's not true to say, that we actually have a well-developed underpinning to that declaration. What the Secretary General of NATO said was, well, it's a very good idea to keep the enemy guessing. And it's certainly true that one wouldn't want to create a situation in which the enemy knew that they could escalate up to a certain point, when they hit that point, then they would know, of course, that they'd hit the point, so they would avoid it, in which the response might come. But you know, ladies and gentlemen, it's all very well to keep the enemy guessing. What about yourself still guessing? That's a much less desirable situation. So I do think that we do need, actually, to focus our thoughts on what we really do mean by that. You've got many nations inside NATO. It isn't automatically the case that we will see it through the same lens. You have to work on it beforehand. Preparation, we were told, and you were saying that, preparation is extremely important. So I would say this is an area where we need to do a great deal more thinking, and we need to have actually answers for ourselves about where a point, what elements would produce a situation in which a response might be necessary. The second area I want to talk about briefly was ransomware. This is extortion by cyber means. It started quite some time ago, longer ago than people realize. I think the first attack was in 1989. And it is now, the single biggest form of fraud taking place in the world. And the existence of cryptocurrencies, of course, have made the whole business of extracting money from the victim all that easier. There aren't reliable figures on the losses. What we do know is that they are very considerable, if only because those who actually have to process the payments know that these payments are big and growing. And the US has better figures than most other countries, but the US has reported that American banks, which have processed these payments, in 2021, those payments amounted to $1.2 billion. That's the payment. And that's the payment we know of a very small proportion of what's actually gone on, because most of these ransom payments are not declared to authorities. Secondly, it's not the only cost. It may be a minor cost compared with resetting all your systems, finding your customers again, and indeed, this is the kind of activity that can actually, and does, put companies out of business. This is very big stuff, and it's undermining the stability of our companies, and it is a growing threat to which we do not have a response. Most of the people who are engaged in the extortion, of course, live in jurisdictions that we can't get at. Therefore, we can't get law enforcement cooperation, and it's a real challenge for our law enforcement authorities. And we are, at the moment, I would say, very much getting nowhere. So we are entirely dependent for our ability to combat this on the quality of our defenses. I don't think that this situation will change in the foreseeable future, but we need to try, at the very least, to increase the level of international cooperation in this area, but above all, strengthen our ability actually to prevent the intrusion that takes place. The third one I wanted to say briefly is what I was briefly referring to in the grey zone. It's a very difficult policy area, and very difficult area to produce viable legislation. The UK is about to attempt this, bringing forward a bill which is called social. It deals with social harms, and it's got a fancy name because it used to be called the Social Harms Bill. It's now changed its name, and I've temporarily forgotten it. But it's designed to bring in both controls and responsibility on social media companies, who at the moment are not subject to the kind of controls that, have traditionally prevailed in publishing. And it's designed, obviously, to create a situation in which the social media companies do have to take some greater responsibility for what appears on their platforms than is currently the case. I think everybody knows this is going to be jolly difficult. And whether we will succeed in producing something that's really viable, I don't know. The government at the moment, British government, seems to be moving in the area of trying to establish what, in effect, I would say was a carve-out for children. That's to say, to oblige a situation in which children under a certain age can't be taken on as users without declaration of age. That raises the extraordinarily difficult problem of valid age verification. And people who go into this know that it's an extremely difficult area, actually, to be certain that you're actually getting the real article in that area. So that may be one way forward. We shall see. But I think one shouldn't underestimate the destabilizing effect of the use of cyber in this area, and the way in which it, as I say, it affects young people very early in life, and can have lifelong effects on behaviour in society. So it's not trivial. This bill will also deal, on the external side, with the problem I just mentioned of our unfriendly neighbour, particularly in the UK's case, it's particularly Russia, who does seek to intervene in the British political process by the use of AI and machine learning. We have plenty of instances of that kind of thing going on. It's a question of can you detect it, and can your own authorities actually ensure that the activities are taken down. I said right at the beginning that cyber is intruded into all the corners of the way in which we run our societies and run our economies. Those three examples are designed to perhaps stimulate some debate on what we do about them. It's, I think, a kind of challenge to democracies that we haven't really faced before, where we're called upon, not simply to defend the safety of our citizens and our territory, but actually also increasingly to invigilate and monitor the functioning of our values. I mean, what I've been talking about goes fundamentally to the balance that you need to strike between free speech and protection. And I think it was one of the speakers earlier on said, we won't necessarily, even among democracies, agree on that. And I can see that it's one of those areas where there may well be differences, across the pond between how Europeans think about that and how the US does. But it affects us all. And the value, if I might say it, of this kind of occasion is that we can debate how we try and cooperate over it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Baroness. That was exciting.